Okay, says the nutritional content per ounce of three foods, food A, B, C, is presented in the table on the right. If a meal consisting of the three foods allow exactly 2,300 calories, 116 grams of protein, and 2550 milligrams of vitamin C, how many ounces of each kind of food should be used? So, I mean, you could use A, B, and C, right? But we'll just stick to our X, Y, and Z. And we know we want to come up with a matrix, so I definitely know I'm going to have three different equations and three different variables for food A, B, and C. You just have to be careful how this is presented. You might want to take this and throw it completely over here, but notice that our calories actually are going to be the row, protein the next row, and vitamin C the next row. How you know that, if you put up above here X, Y, Z, then you know all of these have to be for food A. So in other words, the 100, 13, and 150. So writing these out, I can see 100 of food A plus 300 times food B plus 300 times food C, and where do I get the 2,300? In the paragraph here. And so writing each one of these, now I can actually put these into a 3x3 matrix that I can solve. So here we go. First thing I want to do is turn this 100 into a 1. Well, that'd be pretty easy. I could divide every single term by 100. And doing so, 100 over 100, 1, 300 over 100, 3, 300 over 100, 3, 23 over 100, 23. All right, moving right along. Now I want to turn this 13 into a 0. I just always remember anytime you want to turn something into a 0, you multiply the other row with the 1 by the negative of that value, or the opposite, I should say. So I'm going to take negative 13 times row 1, multiply it, plus row 2. So negative 13 times everything in row 1, and then add it to everything in row 2 to get my new row 2. All right, next, 150 needs to be 0. Look for the 1s in row 1, multiply it by the opposite, which would be negative 150, and add it back to row 3. So multiply negative 150 by everything in row 1, and then add to row 3, and that gives me my new row 3. All right, the next value, I want to turn negative 27 into a 1. Well, we know we always divide or multiply by the reciprocal. The only problem is that's going to cause some issues with fractions, don't like fractions, and decimals. What if we just flipped these two rows? There's nothing wrong with that, and the reason why I would do that is now if I want to turn the 50 into a 1, if I divide every row by 50, okay, or multiply by 1 over 50, I won't end up with any fractions. So I end up with my nice 1, and then all of these divided so nicely into 50. All right, next, I want to turn the negative 27 into 0. I see row 2 right above it, that I can multiply row 2 by the opposite. So the opposite of negative 27 would be positive 27, and then add to row 3. So I take every term in row 2, multiply it by 27, and then add to every term in row 3 to get my new row 3. Okay, negative 223, I need to turn that into a 1. Surprisingly, the number right next to it is going to divide evenly. So I divide it by negative 223 every term, and I get my 1. Negative 669 divided by negative 223 is 3. So I already know that Z, okay, or food C, equals 3. Continuing right along, the next value, negative 7, needs to become a 0. So I look at the row with the 1 in it, which is row 3, multiply it by the opposite, and add to row 2. So I take every value in row 3, multiply it by 7, and then add to my old row 2 to get my new row 2. All right, we know what food C is, and we actually now know what food B is. Almost finished. Let's turn this 3 into a 0. I'm going to multiply row 3, why? Because that has the 1 in the same column, and then add back to row 1 to get my new row 1. All right, one more to go. That 3 needs to become a 0. I see right below it in row 2, it has the 1 in that same column. So I multiply by -3, and then I add back to row 1, and that gives me my final answer. So everything in row 2 was multiplied by -3, added back to row 1 to get my new row 1, and I am finished. All right, I have actually this slide that shows every single step along the way. If you want to just look at this one slide to go back and see the actual order I went in and how to get my actual answers.